They hype the issue of the nuclear weapons, as do some in the United States, for precisely the same reason that weapons of mass destruction were hyped in Iraq. So today in Iran, we're seeing the same thing, except we can stop it now, ahead of time, because there is no weapons program in Iran. Found out that Ahmadinejad had won by 62%. According to the official figures. Now, from somebody who had covered the election, I was shocked, and the people of Iran were shocked. I went out onto the streets, and people said it was a coup d'etat, that it was impossible that that many votes, they expected at least for there to be a runoff. I got piecemeal information at the time about vote fraud, but in the subsequent months, more people came forward. And essentially what happened was the word went out from the top that Ahmadinejad has to win at all costs. But it was a decentralized effort. It wasn't like they miscalculated the votes at the very top. The word went out down to the precinct level, or the equivalent. And so what happened was the Revolutionary Guard, which is the main military force in Iran, and the Basiji, which are these right-wing religious militia under the control of the Revolutionary Guard, stacked the ballot boxes. They would take old people into the booth, and regardless of who they wanted to vote for, made sure they voted for Ahmadinejad. In the areas where the where the reformists were likely to win, those ballots never made it to the counting area. So in the coming days, in the days afterwards, the demonstrations began spontaneously. They were not called for by the reformist candidates, but they marched in the street, "Where is my vote?" And at one time there was perhaps as many as 1 million people marching through the streets of Tehran and in other cities around Iran silently, a huge, massive protest that was shaking the government to the core because they had not expected this kind of a reaction. There are people in the United States who say the United States has to bring democracy to Iran. Or help promote democracy in Iran. Well, you know, the Iranians are pretty suspicious when they hear that, because they had some experience with that in the past. In 1953, Iran had democracy. It had civil society. It had free labor unions, free religious association, free newspapers, a parliamentary competitive system with competitive parties, and they voted democratically to nationalize British oil, because British oil had been ripping off Iran for decades. And when that happened, the British and then the CIA came in and overthrew that democratic government and installed a dictatorship from, basically picked by the United States, the Shah or the king. So when the United States talks about promoting or supporting democracy in Iran, it rings very hollow, because every Iranian knows about that history from 1953. Ehud Barak spoke before the Washington Institute for Near East Policy in February, and he said, and this is acknowledged now, it's finally being acknowledged by the Israeli leadership, the Iranian leaders may be radical, but they're not mashugana. Now, mashugana, you may know, is a Farsi word. My Iranian friends are going, what? Mashugana is Yiddish for crazy. So the Israeli government knows that Iran is not crazy. So and they frankly know that Iran is not going to launch an offensive attack on Israel, and that they hype the issue of the nuclear weapons, as do some in the United States, for precisely the same reason that weapons of mass destruction were hyped in Iraq. So today in Iran, we're seeing the same thing, except we can stop it now, ahead of time, because there is no weapons program in Iran. They are not a threat to Israel in the sense of an offensive military strike. Now, the Obama administration came into power and made a tactical shift from what Bush had done. It emphasized negotiations. It stopped talking about bombing Iran, and made a number of offers about the nuclear program and so on. And unfortunately, though, it was strictly a tactical switch, because it didn't shift any of the basic demands the United States has been making on Iran under Republicans and Democrats for many years. And the threat was, if Iran didn't go along with it, they would impose crippling sanctions. So as recently, basically starting at the beginning of this year, they've now shifted back again to a much more belligerent tone towards Iran. We start seeing more leaks from the Pentagon and the CIA about possible military strikes, what would happen if Israel attacked Iran without U.S. permission, which I don't think could happen, but that kind of speculation, and trying to get Russia and China to go along with crippling sanction, which, by the way, hurt the people of Iran, not the Iranian leadership. They've tried various kinds of sanctions against the Iranian leadership. They don't work. And when they crank up the sanctions to a higher level, they inevitably hurt Iranians. And so when I went out and talked to ordinary Iranians in the Green Movement, remember, these are the people who are fighting for democracy, which I think have all of our sympathy. They are opposed to sanctions from the United States. They're not only opposed to increasing the sanctions, they're for rolling back the existing sanctions. Because all it does is give the government in Iran the excuse to say, aha, you people fighting for democracy are allied with the United States, and they support your movement, you're trying to overthrow us, so that justifies us, and they try to rally people around the government because of what the United States is doing. And unfortunately, Obama now, in my view, is adopting pretty much a similar policy to what the later years of the Bush administration did on it when it comes to Iran. I think it's foolhardy, it's a mistake, it has the opposite effect, especially when it comes to a country like Iran where there is a popular movement, where there's an alternative. I'm not claiming that they're going to come to power tomorrow. There's ups and downs in the movement. Right now it's a bit of an ebb because of a tremendous repression, but that's not going to be the end of it. It is going to rise up again. The anger is there. And they're not going to rise up and install a pro-US government. They're going to rise up and install an Iranian government that looks after their own interests. I don't think they will carry out some of the aggressive foreign policies that Ahmadinejad has. I think the reformists, if they come to power, would back off on all of these efforts to lead the Muslim world, which he's trying to do. They would focus on solving Iran's very real problems. I think they would sit down to negotiate with the United States, but on all these issues, they're still going to want nuclear power. They're still going to want control of their oil resources. They're not going to suddenly open up the floodgates to U.S. Oil companies. There's a whole series of things that are not going to maintain Iranian sovereignty, and we should understand that. I think the best thing the United States can do at this time is to stop take the military option off the table, to not only not increase the sanctions, but roll back the sanctions, to acknowledge that the people of Iran themselves have to resolve their own problems, and it's not the United States to to go around the world trying to impose its will willy-nilly around the world. And I think if we do that, we'll see a significant change in U.S. policy and a far better Iran.